Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Staying dry on this beautifully rainy Thursday here. Good to have y'all join us. Thank you for being here and thank you for coming. Nice to get ready to learn with y'all. So hope everybody's doing well, feeling good. For those eating lunch, the day of home, enjoy your lunch. Let's get some learning together. So we're going to learn a little bit today from the Sfat Emet, also known as the Sfas Emes, if you're Ashkenazi. Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib of Alter of Ger. I'm hoping you guys can all see this on the screen. Yes? Okay. He was a very influential in the realm of Hasidut, but also very well known as a Torah scholar in his own right. And much of his work, the Sfat Emet, deals not only with his teachings on the Torah, but also his teachings on the Talmud and Midrashim and other rabbinic works as well. So he is well respected, not just for his Hasidut, though he is certainly that as well, but also for his larger teachings in Torah as well. So we're going to look at his teaching as we're on Parashat Shmot, as we're going to transition from the book of Genesis and the stories of our patriarchs to the book of Exodus and the Exodus. That's where we're going. So if somebody wants to start us off with the verse that he's going to be droshing, feel free, and then we'll kind of go from there.
I'll be glad to read, starting with after a long period.
Yeah.
After a long period, the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites groaned under the labor. They cried out, and their cry from the bondage went up to God.
Good. In some sense, this is really the beginning of the Exodus story. Up until this point, other than the first couple verses of the book of Exodus, we find the Israelites slowly going downhill in terms of their life in Egypt. They are enslaved. The Pharaoh orders their infant sons to be killed. Things are not looking good for the Israelites. And here they cry out, and their cry from bondage went up to God. God hears them, and God says, I'm going to do something about this, and sends Moses to go back. And the next scene you really have is Moses and the burning bush, when God calls out to Moses to come. So this is really kind of the very first beginning of the Exodus starting, is this verse. Any questions, comments, thoughts before we go on? Okay. You were doing well, Stuart. Why don't you keep reading?
All right. Hold on. Yep, there you go. My teacher, my grandfather, may his memory be a blessing, taught that before Pharaoh died, they were so steeped in exile that they didn't feel that they were in exile. Now that the redemption just began, they understood their exile and groaned. This is the meaning of the verse, I will bring you up from under the sufferings of Egypt. They were not able to tolerate the way of Egypt.
Good. So just a quick note on the Sfat Emet. His mother died when he was very young, and his father died when he was 8. So being orphaned, his grandfather took him in, which is why he is citing teachings in the name of his grandfather, because that's who largely raised him in his life. And when his grandfather passed, they had asked the Sfat Emet to become the rebbe, and he politely declined. He was 18 years old at the time, maybe didn't feel ready or just didn't want to step into his grandfather's shoes. They assigned it to somebody else, and then when that person died about 4 or 5 years later, they asked him again, and they talked him into doing it then. So that's why he's kind of citing in the name of his grandfather, because that's really the one that was really his primary teacher in his life. So what is his grandfather saying here?
Sometimes you don't know how bad something is until there's like a wake-up call. So, you go through the motions, and when something happens, it brings you a new awareness to your situation. So they were going through the motions of their lives in Egypt. And it was when the Pharaoh died that they were like, oh, you know what? It's really crappy here. And that's when they started complaining to God.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
things were bad. They knew they were bad, but it was so bad they didn't even it didn't really occur to them how bad they had it. They were suffering so much they couldn't really see that there was anything beyond what they were suffering. And I don't know if anybody relates to this, but there are times where you're in such a bad situation you don't see any way out of it. You just accept that that's who you are, that's where you are, that's what life is like, and there's nothing to do about it. Now we have a moment here. We have kind of a flip here. We have a moment here where they're like, wait a minute. There might be something to do about it. Like, this is getting really bad. There has to be something better. And I think in some way, that's really the beginning of the redemption. Is when you're no longer ready to accept the bad situation you're in, that's when you can start to get out of it. And that's really the beginning of the Exodus. It's not even, going back up to the top here, it's not even that the king of Egypt died. It's the Israelites groaned under their labor and they cried out. It was this recognition that they don't have to endure it. Life does not have to be this way. And so that's that groaning, that crying out, that's really the beginning of the Exodus. When the Israelites recognize doesn't have to be like this. By the way, hi, Jonathan. Glad you're joining us.
Sorry, I'm late. I was having connectivity problems.
No worries. We're glad you're here. Questions, comments, thoughts?
This just kind of, I just thought about last week when I can't remember the rebbe's name, but the one that was in the Warsaw Ghetto that said that the children of Israel, when they suffer so much that they cry out, that God feels it, and that's when redemption comes. That just kind of circled back to kind of that thought.
Yes, the Eish Kodesh kind of says, God is suffering with the people. And in some sense, you almost get the feeling like God is waiting for the Israelites to do something about it before God's going to act, at least here in the Exodus. That there has to be some kind of spark, some kind of initiation on our part for God to help us. We tell this to our kids all the time. If you need help, ask for help. If you don't ask for help, we assume you know what you're doing and you assume we got it. But if you don't got it, ask for help. And so similarly, the Israelites needed to ask for help. They needed to initiate this to start, and then God is able to get involved once that happens. But as long as they didn't recognize how badly they had it, they weren't ready to come out of it.
So, Rabbi, I can ask you a question, a basic question. Maybe it's a simple question, but do we really ascribe human feelings to God, human emotions, that that God feels bad because of this, God is ashamed of this, the things that humans feel. But does God really experience those kind of things, or is God above that and has a bigger plan and a bigger, different motives for helping or not helping the Jews or other people under certain circumstances?
Good. This is a long-standing debate in Jewish and rabbinic thought. The Torah certainly seems to ascribe human feelings and ideas to God. God has regret. You look at the book of Noah, it says that God, or in the story of Noah, it says God regretted his creation. You look at other things that talks about God loving, God getting angry. God, so the Torah very clearly ascribes that God has feelings. Maimonides, very famously, being an ultra-rationalist, disagrees with that interpretation and basically argues, no, God doesn't have feeling, God doesn't do any of that. It just says that because the Torah has to be written in the language of people. People are going to understand it. We need to give the concepts that people do, but God doesn't have a body. God doesn't have feelings. God doesn't have it's just ways for us to understand God.
But
I'm reminded of an old philosophy point, and I can't remember the philosopher who says it, but it says essentially that if cows had gods, they'd be in the shape of cows.
But if God created us and created our feelings, it seems to me that God would at least be able to understand and feel our feelings.
Right. So I am not a Maimonidean. Love Maimonides. I respect Maimonides. I just disagree with him sometimes. So I'm not big on on that. I feel that in some sense, we need to have a relationship with God, and we can't have a relationship with something or someone that we can't understand, comprehend, and who we assume can't understand us either. So if we assume that God is so great and almighty and all powerful and so far beyond human life that we can't have a relationship with God, then what's the point of a covenant? What's the point of any of that if we can't actually connect because God is so far beyond us? So in that sense, I have no problem talking about God having feelings or God having emotions or anything like that, because I feel like that helps us be able to have that connection with God as well. If you get into Kabbalah very much describes God's feelings and God's emotions and whatnot, and God gets lonely. They go into great detail into the divine genitalia. There's all sorts of things that go on in Kabbalah that very strongly personify God in that sense. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Other questions, comments, thoughts before we go on? Excellent. So let's continue. So the redemption's just beginning. They groan. And now we're going to get a little more detail. Somebody wants to read the next one.
I'll read it. Of course, every exile has many levels. God takes out the prisoners, delivers the humble, helps the poor. These are the three aspects of redemption.
Okay. So he's now going to explain these. So let's not get too far into it, but he's kind of saying there are three levels of redemption, or at least three kinds of people who need redemption. And he's going to kind of explain in detail who these people are in a moment. Keep going, do one more, and then we'll kind of discuss.
The middle group are those that are prisoners in exile, and they are unable to broaden the point of divine life that is inside of them. It is therefore said, takes out the prisoners.
Okay. So who is this first group of people?
The prisoners.
Okay, what does that mean?
Maybe they were political prisoners who should not have been jailed in the first place.
Well, what does he say? What does he say?
He's saying
does
it's
he mean by prison?
those in exile. Those that are in exile from, I guess, from Israel, from the land.
I think he's saying those who just have no way to see any other option than continuing what they're doing. Or to
Okay, so
continue
he
to live that way.
kind of what Eddie's saying. What he's saying is prisoners know that they're in jail, right?
Mm.
It's kind of hard to not know when you're in jail. There's a Talmudic principle, though, that a prisoner cannot free themselves. You can't free yourself. So there's some really beautiful drashot on that, by the way. Some that modern rabbis have given some beautiful divrei Torah on this idea that a prisoner can't free themselves and that we need to be able to help each other out of each other's prisons. But you know that you're there. So I think this is the first group he's talking about. Those who know that life is bad, those that know that they're in prison, those that know that there's something wrong, they just can't move beyond it. They said they can't free themselves. As he says, they can't broaden the point of divine life that is inside of them. They're kind of stuck. They feel stuck spiritually in this sense of, I know things are bad, I just don't know how to get out of it. There's a story in the Talmud, but I always quote it from the West Wing. You got anybody West Wing fans? Back in the day? Great show if you ever motivated to watch it. But it was a great show. But there's a great scene where it follows the president and his staff, and one of the staff members had gotten shot and is really struggling with what happened. And the chief of staff tells him this story. It's one of my favorite stories. It says this guy falls down in a hole. And he's stuck in the hole. He can't get himself out of it. And a priest walks by. The guy yells down from the hole, says, hey, Father, can you help me out? And the priest writes down a prayer, throws it in the hole, and walks away. And the guy stays for a while and then sees a doctor walk by and says, hey, doc, I'm stuck in this hole. Can you help me out? Doctor pulls out his prescription pad, writes a prescription, throws it down in the hole, and walks away. So soon the guy sees one of his friends and says, hey, Joe, I'm stuck in this hole. Can you help me out? And the friend jumps in the hole with him. The guy turns to him and says, you fool, what are you doing? Now we're both stuck here. And the friend goes, but I've been in this hole before and I know how to get out. That's kind of what he's describing here, is like this guy who is stuck in the hole, can't find his way out of it, to be able to move forward with whatever he's stuck in. Talmud has a very similar story, by the way, which was really interesting to read. But questions, comments, thoughts before we go on?
I just had a question about the Hebrew word. I guess it's galot for
Galut.
galut.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you need to mention to get inside that word? Maybe that might, I don't know. I mean, it is what it is, or is there some other layer to it that
No, it usually refers to as exile. If you're Ashkenazi, it's gullus.
Right.
You ever heard people like, oh, we're so stuck in gullus.
Yeah. Right.
But no, it means like exile, means like separate. So in some sense, there's two ways to look at it. One, and I'm somewhat giving away the ending here. One way is galut me'eretz Yisrael, that you're exiled from the land.
Hmm.
And that, this assumes that Israel is the centerpiece,
Mhm.
and we aren't in Israel. And so therefore we're in exile. We're stuck in this area where we were sent out of our land and waiting for the time to get back in. Exile can also be a spiritual exile,
Mhm.
in which we feel cut off from God, from the divine source, from who we are. Excuse me. And we're exiled in that sense of we're feeling disconnected and want to re-establish that connection.
Mhm. Okay.
So that's
Thank
what
you.
I was thinking about when I was reading this paragraph, that this person is like not in such a terrible physical place, but that this person is removed from God. And then like in the beginning, when we were talking about being slaves in Egypt, the whole notion of Egypt being the narrow place. And so this person is a prisoner in this narrow place because he can't figure out how to get closer to God.
Beautiful. And in some sense, I think you guys are picking up on the Hasidic line of thinking, which is that what the Torah is telling us is not really what the Torah is trying to, what the Torah says is not really what the Torah said. What the Torah says is that Israel was in Egypt. But what Torah is really telling us is about a spiritual exile, about feeling disconnected from God. And now what the Sfat Emet is trying to teach us is how to get out of it, how to reconnect. And he's saying there's three different kinds of people. One person is exactly that. They're stuck spiritually. They feel like, they're doing things, but it's not really doing anything spiritually for them. They're just kind of feeling like they're going through the motions, or they're not connecting, or they're not able to really access the divine spirit that is in them. And they're just kind of feeling emotionally and spiritually stuck. And it says God will help them. God will take out the prisoners. God will take out those who are stuck in this spiritual jail and free them, because that's part of the redemption of what God does. Other questions, comments before we go on?
I just have one question. So whenever they talk about like the exile, and I'm thinking about them being exiled in Egypt and then being brought out of Egypt into the land, that's a not so much physical manifestation of them being in bondage and slavery, but just they were in exile and God had to bring them with the Torah and all the covenant and everything closer to him, or that's to bring them out of the spiritual desert into relationship with him?
Kind of, yes.
Okay.
Like, I think part of what the Hasidic line of thinking is saying is that Egypt is symbolic of the spiritual struggles we all experience. And part of what the Exodus is, and what the Exodus does, is show us a way of just as the Israelites are getting out of slavery into Egypt, how do we get out of our own slavery, our own personal spiritual slavery, spiritual narrow places, spiritual prisons, and how do we free ourselves from those? And that the Exodus acts as a spiritual roadmap to do that. So that's one kind of person. Let's go on to the next one. Somebody want to read this one?
I can.
Sure.
Delivers the humble. These are the tzaddikim who themselves are not in exile, but who for the sake of the group remain there like Moses did. Moses was a shepherd and was prepared for redemption. Understand that he himself was not in exile, but was prepared to redeem Israel. Similarly, the light of those 70 souls that came to Egypt were there to prepare for redemption. About them it is said, God delivers the humble.
Okay. So what's he saying?
But first, who are the 70 souls?
Good. Anybody know the reference?
Are those the references of Joseph and all the brothers and children and everybody that came up to Egypt from
Good.
Jacob?
In the first few verses of the book of Exodus, in chapter 1, it tells us how, Jacob and his children and their wives and all their people came down to Egypt, and the number of those people, and there were 70 of them that came down. So the total number of Israelites who started the exit, who started the Yeridah, the going down to Egypt, numbered 70, and then it talks about how they greatly multiplied from there. So what does it mean delivers the humble? Who's the second group in the exile?
Well, if they're tzaddikim, they're wonderful people, but they are choosing to stay within the group. I presume to be a good influence on the other people to help them achieve redemption.
Good. It's Joe who jumps in the hole with the guy in the story. It's somebody who, remember, keeping in mind also, tzaddik in Hasidic thought is a code word for the rebbe themselves. So in some sense, thinking about the shtetl, thinking about Eastern Europe, saying, okay, some of you are spiritually stuck, fine. Some of us, as tzaddikim, the rebbes, we're not spiritually stuck. We're good. But we know you need us to stay here and help you and guide you along the way. We're the ones who are going to stand here with you. We're going to shepherd you through this. We could get out. And in fact, he brings up Moses, which is a really interesting example. Moses was a shepherd, good, but Moses didn't have to go back. Well, what if he had said no to God? Moses was out. He was an Israelite. He had escaped. He was wanted for his life. He didn't have to go back. He could have stayed in Midian. But he was the kind of person who needed to go back, because as a shepherd, you can't leave your flock behind. And tzaddikim, in the same way, can't leave their flock behind. They might be good. They might be able to get out. They might not be feeling spiritually stuck. They might feel spiritually connected and whole and fantastic and free, but they can't leave their flock behind, and they're going to stay behind with their flock to help raise them up. And help them prepare for the redemption that's coming for them. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Rabbi, it says, similarly, the light of those 70 souls that came to Egypt. What does that mean? They weren't there, of course, but it says the light of those 70 souls.
Excuse me.
It says similarly,
Yeah, I'm
light
reading
of
it.
those 70
I
souls.
think so. In some sense, I think there's a couple different things going on. One way to look at it is if those 70 people didn't go down to Egypt, would the Exodus have ever happened?
Well, no, because they wouldn't have been there in the first place.
Exactly. So in some sense, I think there's one way to read this as the 70, Jacob and his children and children-in-laws, or well, I guess all daughters-in-law, as the case may be, his sons and his daughters-in-law, and the people who came down, his grandchildren, there were 70 of them. They went down as a way to prepare to start paving the way for the redemption that was to come. Because the redemption, the Exodus, the redemption couldn't have happened if they hadn't gone down, and that they needed to go down as a way to prepare the way for everything else.
So,
An alternative way to read this. Oh, did you have a question, Jonathan?
no, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. I'll wait.
Okay, the alternative way to read this is, I don't know how much we've talked about Lurianic Kabbalah. Have I mentioned the RE, Rabbi Isaac Luria?
I don't remember.
So one of the key ideas in Lurianic Kabbalah that Rabbi Isaac Luria of Tzfat promoted was that, I'm trying to do this simply, but without getting too far into the too far down the rabbit hole. There are sparks of divine light that are stuck in the material world. Part of our job is to return those divine sparks to their divine source.
I think you did mention that before.
Chazara, review is a good thing. So, if I have to say it a few times, it's okay. And sometimes what that involves is you have to descend deep into the material world in order to dig up the sparks to elevate them back to their world, back to their divine source. So how do you do that? Like, how do you generally elevate the sparks? You do it through performing mitzvot. Every time you perform a mitzvah with the proper intention and you do it correctly, you're able to elevate a spark back to its source. And that sometimes you need to really go down and lower yourself and humiliate yourself and in order to get to the really deep, mucky sparks in order to elevate them back and to come back with them out. And I'm wondering if there's some sense in that as well of where he's going, is that these 70 souls had to go down into the muck, the dirt, the grime of Egypt in order to elevate the sparks that were there.
The light, though, is to me, when I think about shepherding, I think of torch bearers who are leading the way and showing the way. They were necessary for all this to happen. So even though they're not there, their spiritual light still sort of shines like a guiding torch. If that makes any sense.
Beautiful, yes. And when it says the light of those 70 souls, it's really referring to their spiritual light that they brought with them to prepare for the future redemption. Keeping in mind, there was about a 400-year period between, when they went down and when they came out. So, other questions, comments, thoughts? we've kind of talked about this last group, but if somebody wants to read the last group,
Helps the poor. These are the lowly ones that don't even feel their exile, and they need a great salvation. This is the beginning of the redemption, as it is said, I will bring you up from the sufferings of Egypt.
good. This is a little bit where he started the drash, right? Where this last group are the ones who are so deep in their spiritual suffering that they don't even know that they're suffering. And they don't even know that there's another path out there. And they're the ones that really need this redemption, the salvation the most.
This reminds me of the from the Seder, like the wise son and the wicked son and all that business, that you have to reach people at different people need things at different levels.
Yes.
The one who doesn't know how to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, you see this, there's a fourth term as well. So he is bringing in the number 4 as well. 4 sons are kind of my favorite. The 4 children are kind of my favorite part of the Seder, but I think there's a lot of really great teachings that come out of that. Somebody want to read this 4th term?
Therefore, there is a 4th term of redemption. I will take you for myself as a people. The purpose of the redemption was to bring them up out of this slavery. In every exile, we find this to be true.
Yeah. That the purpose, the ultimate purpose is to bring them up. And to take you for myself as a people, that God is going to personally lift them up out of slavery, take you as a people, so that, and that you will accept God as well.
Is there some kind of a meaning for 4, like with the 4 questions and the 4 sons and now the 4th term, or it just random?
So there's some interesting things on numerology in general. It seems much of the numbers in Torah have to do with either 3, multiples of 3, or multiples of 3 plus 1. Nobody's entirely clear on what the significance of 3 was. I think the closest we can get is that 3 has a connotation of stability. The book of Kohelet says, a 3-legged stool never falls. Right? There's a sense that there's a certain stability that comes with 3. Why 3, though? Scholars are still trying to understand that. But if you look at a lot of the numbers, days in a week, 7. 3 times 2 plus 1. 10 commandments, 3 times 3 plus 1. There's 70. It's a multiple of 3 plus, what was it, 13? No, I'm not good at math. 23. 23 times 3 plus 1. For some reason, the number this comes up frequently, but nobody's entirely clear why. 12 sons, 3 times 4. In fact, 3 times 4, which is itself 3 plus 1. Now, there, I believe it's Rabbi Josh Heller in Atlanta, who has a really fascinating theory that I'm not going to go too into at the moment, because I'm probably going to want to teach this class at some future date. So I don't want to ruin it now. Is that the number 4 in the Seder is not really accurate. It's really 5. And that there's for every time there's a 4, there's a hidden 5th. And if you read it closely, there's always like a 5th part of the 4, and it's hinting at something else. Again, not going to go too deep into it because this is like a long class in and of itself. I have the source sheet all prepped, so I'll probably teach it some other time, but there's a hidden 5th every time there's a 4 in the Seder.
Sign me up.
Excellent.
I know now you're gonna make me go look at the Haggadah at home and see if I.
You're only 3 months from the Seder. I mean, it's
I can't
never too early
wait.
to
You
start
should have bought
prepping.
it up. Now I'm like,
Technically you're not supposed to start until right after Purim, but you need to start now. I'm not going to stop you.
I gotta prep.
But I do think he brings in this 4th term with that knowledge of the 4 that comes in the Seder. I don't think that's entirely accidental by the Sfat Emet. I think that's part of why he brings in a 4th term of redemption as kind of as a whole, as all 3 of these groups and the whole people are going to be redeemed, because it does tie back in with the Seder and the number 4 that commemorates the Exodus, which he is kind of discussing and talking about here. So I don't think it's necessarily accidental. He's bringing that in here either. All right. The last section, if somebody wants to read it, somebody who hasn't read, unless the people who haven't read don't want to read, in which case somebody else take it.
Greater than this is we find that also in every individual, we find these steps. Every Jew has some aspect in which he or she is free, specifically after the Exodus from Egypt. There is some part of freedom in every Jew, and there is a part that helps the person prepare for the redemption. That which is true of the community is also true of the individual.
Good. So what's he kind of say here? I think you guys already jumped on this part, but what's he saying?
That we are on the road to redemption, that we're on the road, we're just not there yet.
Who's we?
We, the Jewish people, that we are on our spiritual journey, our connection to God. We are on our way up from that narrow place. We're just not there yet because we're still preparing for the redemption. We're not redeemed yet.
Okay.
And I don't know whether it is important for each individual to find their own redemption, to become redeemed before the greater group, the greater community can participate in redemption itself.
You know what,
Yeah.
that
Go ahead, Tim.
I totally agree with that, because it seems like everything I ever hear about the redemption, it's not as opposed to Christianity where it's individual redemption, it's the whole nation as being redeemed, not just one or specific individual people. So yeah, I totally hear what you're saying with that.
Well, and we're coming up on MLK Day too, right? Like none of us can be free until all of us are free.
Mm-hmm.
I might be quoting that, might be misquoting, so I apologize. I apologize, Reverend King, if I am. But that's a kind of general thrust. But I don't think that's quite what he's saying here, is that it depends. I think what he's saying is the process is the same. And that both communally and individually, we go through the same process of redemption. I don't think he would disagree that we all have to be redeemed together, but he would say on a personal level, it's the same process that we go through as individuals that the group would have to go through to be redeemed as well. So wherever you are as an individual, there is hope for your personal redemption, and that together we'll be redeemed as well as a community. But the two parallel each other.
Yeah, well, if you think of leadership, people typically, I think leaders are those who are redeemed. I mean, if you think of, the Mount Sinai and all what happened there, and Moses coming down, Moses being a leader, the people finally accepted him as their leader. But I don't think all of them were individually redeemed. So you can have redemption in the community in its entirety without at any one time each person being totally redeemed, but they would be on the road in the process of redemption if they accept their redeemed leader as such.
So I'm curious why you don't think the individuals were redeemed.
Well, I'm not saying, I don't know if they were or not. I would just imagine they were so horrible, with the golden calf and all of that. They were so horrible. It's hard for me to believe that immediately when Moses came down and everything that transpired, that everybody said, every single 100% of the people said, oh, that's fine. I accept you. You're my leader. I think they would have to go through some individual process of redemption. But so they will be on the road to being redeemed, but not immediately. That would be the way I'd see it.
Yeah, there's an interesting argument. We'll probably talk about it again when we get to it, but there's an interesting argument about the golden calf is who are the people revolting against, or who are the people sinning against?
The golden calf.
Are you questioning whether it's Moses or God that they?
Yeah, because it's like they made the calf because Moses wasn't there for 40 days and they didn't know where he went.
Right. We usually read it as an affront to God.
Right.
But if you read it super carefully, and some of the rabbinic commentators say this also, it's really a revolt against Moses's leadership. Because he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, our leader's gone, give us a new leader. And when Aaron gets a calf, bakes the calf, it comes out and he says, here is your God.
Here's your God.
So
Here's your new leader.
Yeah. Is there a note of sarcasm in there? Is there a note of kind of abandonment of, why don't we just worship this golden calf? I mean, what else are we going to do?
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily, most of the commentators don't go that route. They tend to say it's less about God and it's more about Moses.
Yeah.
I mean, some commentators say it's about God too. One of my favorite midrashim say, pictures that golden calf happening and God getting furious, and Moses turns to God and says, no, you're taking this all wrong. This is a good thing. And God looks at Moses and goes, how is this a good thing? He goes, oh, because you make the rainfall. Now this calf can help you make the rainfall. And you make the dew. God, this calf can help you with that. And you make the wind blow. This calf can help you. You have an assistant. You have somebody to help you with all this now. What do you like? This is good. And God looks back at Moses and says, Moses, you too? You've gone off the deep end? Like, this calf can't do anything. And Moses looks at God and goes, exactly. This calf can't do anything. What are you so upset about? Like, what are you getting all worked up about? This calf can't do anything anyway. So why are you upset?
It says here, there is a part that helps the person prepare for the redemption. They have not been redeemed. They're preparing. Does that mean that we're waiting for the Messiah? And this, he's preparing them for the redemption so they'll be ready when the Messiah comes? Or is that too early to think about the Messiah?
Oh, no, I think the Sfat Emet would very much say that, so a little bit what he's getting at here is that the Exodus was such a great redemption that it's ingrained in our DNA. And that there's some part of the freedom that we gained that is spiritually a part of us from this time forth, or from that time forth. And as long as we understand the Exodus, as long as we accept the Exodus, as long as we acknowledge it and feel that it's a part of us, then there's some parts, like there's that little spark of freedom, no matter where we are spiritually, no matter where we are physically, there's this little spark of freedom that knows that we are free. And once we know that redemption's possible. Kind of what we said at the beginning. Part of what needed to start the redemption was the Israelites recognizing they don't have to be in this place and there's a possibility for something else. Now, in our time, we already have that because we've seen the Exodus. We know that it can happen. We know redemption is possible. And as long as we know redemption is possible, we can prepare for that redemption to come. We can prepare, we know that that's a possibility, and we can seek out that something better, that better life because of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
He's probably talking about the Messiah. Yes. And I think there's a level at which we can say it even individually or communally, that as long as we know that there's something better, as long as we know there's a better world is possible, as long as we know freedom is possible, then we can prepare ourselves for when that comes.
At some point, I would love to have a discussion. We don't have time today, but just about what happened during the time of the Holocaust in the ghettos and in the concentration camps, and what the leaders were like, the Jewish leaders in there, and how they would take this philosophy that you're talking about to try to help the people in those circumstances maintain sanity and maintain some vision of what good could be in the future.
Here's what
I'm sorry.
I didn't get that.
No, anyway. Sorry.
She
That was
always
my
talks when you're
self-defense.
not talking to her.
Sorry
huh?
about that. I know. Anyway, I think it would take a long time to talk through that, but I think that's a modern day parallel to what was happening back to the Jews in slavery.
Yeah, and the truth is, there wasn't a unified response. There wasn't, the Jewish leaders were all saying the same thing. I think a lot of them were struggling with the same question of how could this be happening? And some of it you see even in survivors. Theologically, there tend to be two kinds of survivors from the Holocaust. Those who survive the Holocaust tend to take one of two theological views. One view is, I cannot believe in a God who would allow what happened to me to happen, and I can't believe in a God who would do so. And they reject God altogether. They say, I can't believe in a God who would allow that. The other group say, I can't help but believe in God because there's no way I could have survived it in any other way. I don't think there's a single answer. I do think, and we'll look at the Eish Kodesh at least a couple more times, I'm sure, and you'll get some more senses of what his response was in the Holocaust. But as he was experiencing the ghetto, you'll get some more sense of where he was coming from. but I'm not sure there was a single unified response. I think there was a lot of struggling with the questions and trying to figure it out. And as one of my teachers, Rabbi David Blumenthal, will say, is that the Holocaust kind of shattered 2,000 years of Jewish theology. And the major theological job that we have after the Holocaust and that we've been engaged in now since has been in rebuilding Jewish theology around it. Other questions, comments, thoughts? I'm gonna stop sharing if that's okay. Yeah.
I would like to know more about that train of thought where you were going just now about the shattering of 2,000 years of theology. I would like to know, but I know we can't do that now, but.
Yeah, I mean, there maybe down the line we can figure out a way to do that. I mean, there's a lot of books that have been written since Jewish theology after the Holocaust. So we can look into that down the line. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for being here. Thanks for learning together. Kol
Thank you.
hakavod.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
And,
Rabbi.
Thank you.
next week we'll look to do this again. So hope you'll join us next week. And in the
Right.
meantime, be well and take care. And if I don't see you, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Take care, everybody. Be well.